What's down, people, and welcome back to another episode of Ghetto Gospel. So where we left off at, Noah was like, "We off the boat now, time to pull up," and proceeded to grow him some grapes, make him some wine, and get sloppy come up out your clothes drunk. His son Ham saw him naked, and then Noah was like, "How dare you see me naked?" And then proceeded to tell that man how his son wasn't never gonna be nothing. And now we caught up. Alright, y'all, it's a lot here in this next chapter, and I have no idea how I'm gonna break this thing down without losing nobody or being dry as an episode of Seinfeld. So what y'all need to know first. I guess the first thing is what this chapter is all about. Churchy folks call this the Table of Nations. I told y'all we was gonna get to it. And essentially, it's telling us what happened to Noah's 3 sons and how they spread out to eventually be everywhere. Now, if you remember episode 12, where we talked about Cain having kids and his kids having kids and so on, you'll realize that this whole idea of keeping a record of who had who ain't nothing new. The difference here is that this ain't just the history of one dude's descendants and how they got worse and worse. This the history of how the nations came to be. Now, I'ma say this again so nobody get confused. I ain't no anthropologist. I made sure to tell y'all that at the beginning of this series. And this part of the book gets super close to anthropology because it's literally telling y'all about people and how they got to where they ended up. So I'm gonna do my best not to present myself like an expert or something that I ain't qualified to speak on. Don't you wish more folks did that these days? Now, concerning Noah's descendants and where they settled at, it's important to remember that as far as we could tell, this was written after all the settling happened. So for example, if I was teaching a class on the history of old school colonial America, and I told you that Mexico used to extend all the way up to the top of Cali, I don't have to stop and say, now you know, California didn't exist back in colonial times. That's obvious. I'm really just using the geography and the state names that we familiar with to try and explain things a little bit clearer. And that's the context you gotta read this with. Even though these clans and nations ain't exist yet, as of the time of Noah and his kids getting off the boat, whoever was reading this was reading it after that stuff happened. So they almost certainly would have understood a statement like, "Yeah, Shem's kids put down roots out there where they just built that new Eli shawarma shack." Not only that, but just like folks from New Orleans after Katrina, people move. And they don't just move because of hurricanes either. You might move because rent is lower in Atlanta, or because you got a good job in Atlanta, or because you want to be close to your kids who decided to go to college in Atlanta. Folks is always trying to get to Atlanta. Anyway, the reasons you might move nowadays is the same reason somebody might move back then. And with that happening generation after generation, it could get kind of hard to try and dial in which people is where, because folks was almost certainly mixing as time went on. This is important to remember, because if you spend more than a few seconds researching the Table of Nations on whatever your favorite search engine is, you'll see folks saying the Table of Nations is wrong because these people are historically from that place, and because people who speak that language is historically from this place. So the Bible must be wrong. And I'ma just say this about that. First, it wasn't no different languages mentioned until the next chapter. Second, just like today, people wasn't glued to the ground. They had the freedom to move wherever on the map they wanted to get to whatever they thought was the better opportunities. And third, the next chapter literally talk about how God scattered people all over the earth. Can we pause for a second and appreciate that God is powerful enough to create all of this and so in control of that power that he could scatter people all over the planet without crushing every last one of them? Now, it's a bunch of folks with all kind of degrees and whatnot that's been arguing about this for decades. But the truth is, that whole argument could get boiled down to just this right here. Is it about where you from or where you at? Folks from hoods all over the world been having that same argument for years. Y'all see my New Orleans tribute joint back there? That's a discussion that's especially relevant to us, even more so nowadays. Like, if you grew up in New Orleans, but after Katrina, you and all your people moved to Atlanta, is you a New Orleanian or an ATLian? You want to see that question get even more complicated? Ask a military kid where they from and watch how they start doing algebra trying to come up with an answer. So what's the point? I don't know. For me, the thing I take from it is that people ain't just come from nowhere. Everybody came from somewhere. The other thing I take from it is that this whole story is eventually gonna lead us to one family. They could have just cut to the chase and jumped straight to the main characters. But the way it's written, it seemed like all of these different tribes and clans and families matter. I think that's important because it seemed like it's a whole bunch of people out here on platforms trying to convince anybody who will listen that their life don't matter. Heck, that's been part of the Eurocentric agenda for hundreds of years. friends. Don't listen to them. If you woke up this morning, your life matters and you have a purpose to serve. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see y'all next week. And as always, peace, and I hope y'all people straight.